Welcome, everybody. It is January 7th. It is 6:02. We're in the Nashua North Boardroom, and I am calling to order the special Board of Education meeting. Ms. Raymond, would you mind doing the roll call?
Sure. Ms. Darling?
Here.
Mr. Claffey?
Here.
Ms. Giglio?
Here.
I'm here. Ms. Lampier?
Here.
Ms. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Ziem?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Present.
Ms. Bishop?
Here.
We also have our Director of HR, Ms. Carey, and we're pleased to welcome Mr. Lincus this evening. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. I just need to grab consensus that Mr. Claffey being on the phone is okay with our board.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So tonight's Board of Ed meeting is to meet and introduce and interview Mr. Lincus. He's one of our superintendent finalists. We're very excited to have you here and get to know a little bit more about you. I was hoping you could open up this meeting by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let me get the mic working, or at least get myself in a position to get the mic working. So it's great to be here. It was great to get into Nashua. My name's Stephen Lincus. I have over 25 years in education. I started my career as a bilingual social studies and ESL teacher. At some point, I continued my career in teaching. I was also a football coach, a track coach, a class sponsor, and anything else they could find for me to do while I was in the classroom, and eventually moved into administration. At some point, somebody said, hey, I think you could do okay there, and I listened, and some things have gone, there's ups and downs, but it's been a good run, and became a principal at one point, was a principal of 3 different middle schools, was an academy director of a high school, have supervised principals, have been an assistant superintendent, where basically I was the number 2 in command of a district, and I'm currently the chief of staff for the Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, so pleasure to be with you all tonight.
Thank you so much. And we have asked our candidates to put together a presentation, which we have up here ready to go. The presentation topic was to describe an instructional innovation or process that you have helped to implement that reduced or eliminated the opportunity gap for students of color, students in poverty, students from culturally diverse backgrounds, or students with disabilities, and what evidence supported this view. I give the floor to you.
So thank you, and then just first of all, thanks for the opportunity to tour schools today. It was a lot of fun, and thank you to the mayor for taking some time, and also it was great to meet the central office staff. But so I'll go ahead and get started. I'm not a PC user, so if I hit the wrong button, please bear with me. And this basically is what you were asking, talking about what was the innovation or the system that was put into place, so I won't go into that slide. But just some background information. So throughout my career, I've worked in some different districts, and one of those was a Houston Independent School District. After having some success as a principal there, working with a great staff and a great group of people, I was honored to get a promotion to become a principal supervisor. The position was called a school support officer, and I supervised 10 schools in the north side of Houston that had about 10,000 students. So as you can see on the list, it was 6 elementary schools that ranged in size from 600 students to 1,100. I had 2 middle schools. One was over 1,400, the other was 850. And I worked with 2 different high schools. One was an early college, which was around 500 students. And that, of course, was an application process school where students applied and were accepted. They took their courses actually on North Houston Community College campus. We had a building there. And the other was a 2,500 student high school that was a comprehensive high school, neighborhood school. So as you see, I got a little bit of variety from 400 to 2,500 in the amount of size. So in looking at the campuses themselves, 9 of the campuses were 85% Hispanic or more. One of the campuses was 60% African American and was located in the North Forest area of Houston, which is a very high needs area. That school was also 40% Hispanic though. All campuses were 85% free and reduced lunch or above. And all schools were minimum of 30% ELL. And I use 30 as the threshold because my one campus that was 40% Latino was the school that was about 35% ELL. Some of my other campuses were as high as 75 to 85%. So we had a strong mix of students, but we also had a lot of newcomers and students who were learning the language as well as exited ELL students. So there is some method to the madness. No, this isn't the last slide. I will get into some of the work as we move forward. But all 10 campuses met state academic standard. In the state of Texas, if you don't meet its academic standard, you become an IR school, which is improvement required, which in most states, the language is turnaround. But they chose IR, so that's the language we used. We had some great successes there, and you notice I'm going to say we. It wasn't me with a magic wand. It wasn't because I showed up to make places great. It was me working with great people. It was me being in a position to help people with talent utilize their talent, and them pushing me to utilize mine. North Houston Early College moved from 1 state academic distinction to 5 academic distinctions. You might say, oh, well, they're the best and brightest. They should be. Well, they're compared to all the other early colleges and all those types of schools in the state. So this was across the state of Texas that they got these distinctions. Burbank Middle School, which was our flagship middle school, they were a 7-star campus. They already had 7 academic distinctions, so the pressure to help them stay at 7, as you can imagine, was immense. We not only helped them stay there, we saw gains at the master's level in both reading and mathematics. So the number of kids who would have scored in most states what's called advanced went up. Shadydale, which was our school over in the North Forest area, they saw an 18-point raise in reading and a 12-point raise in mathematics. They also received 4 academic distinctions. So we saw great work going into, and that's not even getting into some of the schools that were on the cusp, that potentially may or may not have made standard, and we were able to get them to a great point. And like I said, I'm going to say we, because it's not a me thing, it's a we thing, and that's how we work. So focus areas. How did we do this? I stole the tenets from Leverage Leadership, Paul Bambrick Santoyo, and it was great going to a school today and seeing actually one of his books, Build Better Faster, in one of the offices, and us having a dialogue about it. So I was extremely pumped up to see that, and I've also read his 2.0 book, which is for, developing leadership teams. So I think there's some great things there. But these were the strategies that I utilized. So the data-driven instruction meant we used data to drive everything we did. We looked at our formative and summative assessments daily and weekly, as well as every quarter, every 6 weeks, every 9 weeks, however we set it up, to see where we were. How did we get that data? Well, we got it in a couple ways. One was through observation and feedback. What we did is I observed my principals and their leadership teams, and I want to be very clear on that. I also worked with the APs, building coaches, and we took walks together. It wasn't just me and the principal. Sometimes the principal, he or she was busy. So guess what? Their AP or their coach, they got the chance to walk around with me. I'm not sure it was the pleasure or not, but they got to have that opportunity, and we both learned together. But we looked at what was going on in the building. That led us back to what type of feedback are we giving the staff members? What type of feedback was I giving the leaders in the building? And then what was planning going to look like? So then as we moved to the PLCs and we looked at what type of questions are being asked in the PLCs, what's the alignment to state standards, what's the level of task, because task predicts performance. If I expect you to spell cat and that's all I expect of you, that's what you're going to do. If I expect you to solve the Pythagorean theorem, you're going to do that, and I'm going to give you support to make sure you do so. So we make sure the planning matched up. Staff culture. One thing that one of my mentors, Ted Villarreal, always told me is culture eats curriculum for lunch. So one of the things we had to look at was, what are the cultures on our campuses? So as we looked at the data-driven instruction, as we looked at the observation feedback, we looked at the planning, what did the relationships look like between our leadership teams and their staffs? So we use the observation feedback process to build trust amongst those staff who maybe weren't as trusting at the beginning. We used that process to build a direction that everyone was, I'm not going to say bought into, but that everyone was owning. And that was their school, and there was pride. So that's what we helped build in some cases. In other cases, they had it. We just had to keep pushing it a little more so they can keep it going. But we did that. Managing school leadership teams. We talked about what the leadership team meetings were going to look like. How would the principal work with their APs, their coaches? You've got to remember, everything's bigger in Texas. So they had more administrative team members than you do in most states. So it's much larger teams. And you get to a school of 2,500, you can imagine what an admin team meeting looks like. You're talking 12, 15 people in there. So you're almost in a classroom. So you're in there, you're working together, you have a direction, you're taking feedback, you're getting best ideas, and you're making sure it aligns to your school improvement plan, you're making sure it aligns to state standards, and you're making sure it aligns to pedagogical practice. Lastly, finding the time. If you don't plan for it, it's not going to happen. So one of the things I heavily stressed with my principals that I worked with, as well as their leadership teams, was, what are you planning for? Do you have an open calendar? Are you just waiting to find some kid who gets in trouble and you'll deal with that for an hour? Or are you going to hit 2 or 3 classrooms and do some informal observations? Are you going to be on your computer giving them some quality feedback about what they did great and then next steps on some other pieces? So what's the priority of the day? What does our calendar say about us? Because if you don't find the time, it's never going to show up for you. So those are some tenets that I'd like to thank Mr. Bambrick Santoyo and his team for. We utilize those. This is another way we did this. So with the 10 schools, with 5 days a week, it worked out perfectly. I visited each school half a day. So they either got me from 7:30 to 11:30 or 1 to 5, sometimes 8 to 12, sometimes 12 to 4, depending on their dismissal hours. We'd look at their arrival and their dismissal. We were that finite in the details of what we looked at because that talked a lot about the organization. The other thing that it told me is, what are the relationship of the community to the principal? Because that principal and their leadership team are outside. They're the ones out there, you know, when you think of a school of 2,500, that's a lot of cars. You talk about a middle school of 1,100, that's a lot of cars. You're the one waving them. They have their numbers, their colors that they're using to pick their kids up. And if they're not saying hello to that principal, if they're not saying, hi, Mr. Lincus, then I'm kind of thinking, okay, do you know your community? So saw some great things, saw great connections, but we were that finite in the detail of how we looked at things. The leadership teams and PLCs were visited, as I spoke about before. Biggest thing with that was, are we aligned to state standards? What is the task we're asking kids to do? Are we pushing them to the maximum? Kids are going to do what we ask them to do. Kids are going to push to the level we push them to. And here's the other thing I'll say very clearly. There's talented staffs everywhere. You put the staff in the right position, they're going to make the right things happen, and kids will show us how great they really are. Classroom visits were done focusing on building academic needs and practices. We looked at the SIP. We looked at summative informative data. We made sure everything aligned and went back to that. And then observation of feedback session with teachers and building leaders. I know different states vary in this, but I sat in some of the teacher feedback conferences. The teacher would look at me like, what are you doing in here? Because they all knew me because I'd been in their rooms. I said, oh, don't worry, I'm not here to see you. I'm here to see your supervisor. And they're like, what? I said, yep, just like they give you feedback, we give them feedback. So thank you for letting me be in here. If you're not comfortable, I can do this with another teacher. And most of the time, they had seen me enough in the building that they were like, no, go ahead and stay, Mr. Lincus, it's fine. And then afterward, I'd have a debrief session with the leader and just say, hey, what did you think of this? What went well? And we used Bambrick Santoyo's format, and we went through that, and we looked for consistent improvement. A pre-brief of what to look for. So this will all tie back together as well. When we finished something, we would do a debrief at the end. We would talk about what we saw. Generally, as we had this discussion, I was writing their feedback email, and I would ensure to put 3 positives that I saw and then 3 questions. And the questions were wonderings. They were not about, hey, that was terrible, that was bad. It was about, hey, what was the level of task in the classes we visited today? What can be done to improve that as we move forward to next week? So that way they're thinking about it. When we would come back the following week, that's what we started the pre-brief with, is okay, we talked about this. Have you had a chance to get to some rooms? Have you had a chance to have an administrative team meeting? Where are you with this? Because it's about support, and it's about putting people in the right place. I've talked about, the next steps. We would even role play. Sometimes we would sit there and I would say, okay, I'm the teacher we just went into the room for. They did a great lesson. How are you going to praise that but get them to take the next steps? And then vice versa, if it was a struggling classroom, it was okay. We saw a little bit of a struggle there. How are we going to approach this? How are we going to do it in a way where we're building somebody up so they're going to get to the place we need them to be? The email had the look fors. We all went back to that the next week. The other beauty is, I had pictures of the objectives, I had pictures of the tasks, so I could always share those at any point. I would attend school before and after events. The beauty of the elementals I supervised is they were done with school by 2 or 3. So it was very easy to go to their after-school dance, go to their sporting event, go out there, talk to the building leader or a team member, get to know parents, become part of that community as they get to know you and accept you. Parent meetings, I attended some of those as well. I would go in, say hello, tell them who I was, and say, I'm moving to the back of the room. This is your school's meeting. Please talk to them, but I'd love to meet you afterward. The other thing I did informally is I had one campus where a number of our parents would have unofficial PTA visits. They would drink their coffee. They would also be in a very good mood about a lot of things, but then if they also had concerns, that's where those would come up. So I would go sit with them for 20 minutes every time I was there. I would use my trusty friend, the telephone, call the principal, say, hey, I have Mrs. Rodriguez here with me. She has a concern with her child's teacher. Can you please have the teacher communicate with her, or can you set up an appointment if necessary? Sure, we'll take care of that. Took care of 99% of our problems. And it got to a point where we were able to build some trust with some of the parents who maybe sometimes did not have as much trust with that particular administrator, but it put it in a positive position to where they're all coming out with the win. And most importantly, the student is going to be in there learning and getting what they need. We aligned our principal meetings to the academic and social emotional needs of the campuses. Within our data, we would compare that in our monthly team meetings. My boss would have us do that. We would then look at what types of supports do we need. We'd utilize our principals to provide the PD. We would use curriculum coaches from within the district, but it aligned to what our data told us the needs were. Inspecting what we expected, doing what we said we would do. We went in and looked for it. If we said we were looking for higher level tasks, we went in and looked for that. If we said we were looking for these types of activities to line up to the standards, we went and looked for that specifically. But it was known beforehand. It wasn't a got you. It was, this is what we're working on to get better. We said it, we did it. You know, we built credibility. How's this impacting my current and future work? Well, creating team and community culture through dialogue and shared direction, aligning up professional development and resources to improve pedagogy and student learning, consistent feedback to staff members to improve practice. My departments that report to me at this time, we meet every week. I meet with my department heads. And it's about, let's have a dialogue on what's going well. Let's talk about, you know, what we need some improvement on. And most of all, what help do you need from me? Are there some obstacles that I can get out of your way? And one of those things, in looking at a potential superintendent job here, would be meeting with the executive level leadership team. We'd have weekly meetings as a group, and then also, you know, weekly check-ins. But also we meet with board members weekly or bi-weekly, depending on how we could fit everyone's schedules together. Individual, just to see where we're at and get a feel of what are some of the things going on across our district, those common themes that we need to bring forth, and then what are some of those individual themes that need to be worked out with the team so we can make sure they're addressed. Ensuring that all district students leave with their high school diploma plus an industry certification and or college credit. It's very big to me, especially after seeing the awesome CTE programs that are in place here, that we continue that, but that we also look at what other certifications are available. How do we continue to expand that? We have a good number of kids taking AP courses. I've looked at the numbers, they're above state averages, but I think we still have more that can get into classes if given the opportunity. Lastly, I think we can also look at the community college. How do we look at dual credit? What options are available within the state in doing that? And how do we get kids leaving here with a 2-year degree? Every district I've been in has done that, and I think it's very doable here, just like it is everywhere else. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to share. Let's make sure we ensure that every student is on track as we provide their gateway to opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions. We like to go around the room with things, so everybody kind of has one. All right, we were supposed to turn the light back on. So some of these were posed by board members, and then some of them, we actually got some input from I don't know if you've been watching our meetings, we have 2 student board members who met with our student liaison, Ms. Starling, and came up with some questions as well. So when their questions come up, they'll be clearly identified. But first up, we have Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Good to see you again, and thank you for coming to Nashua and your presentation. Please share with us your preferred and most frequently used communication strategies for both internal and external stakeholders, including students.
So in looking at external, I think the biggest thing we use now is social media. One of the things is, you know, very few of us watch news anymore. So using the news stations, not that that's a bad thing, but it's not as common as it was probably for our parents. So I think, you know, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever social websites that you have, that's a good way to connect with parents and students. We, of course, we go a little old school also. We send notes home, so we do that, but we also do those. And also those, the information we want sent out, it's also sent through robocall or text, because as we know, most people now have cell phones. Even in communities of poverty, those numbers are in the 90 to 95% range, depending on whether it's a smartphone or not. So, you know, it's a good way to get information out. We utilize the systems we have, and it does it in different languages. So we ensure that the parents are checking off Spanish, some Arabic, Swahili, and that way they're getting it in those languages. So we do that. We also use media. I've done a number of interviews in Spanish on local television stations where I'm at. I've done them on the radio in Spanish as well. I've done them in English too, so they don't just, I'm just not locked in the Spanish world. I also do them in English, so I do both. I've done them for ABC, NBC, and Fox affiliates over in the area. So that's what we use. We also use YouTube. kind of like you do with your board meetings. We have that. We blast things out on our webpage. So we particularly update our webpage all the time, daily. We put new information daily. Our Twitter and Facebook pages, they're probably updated more than once a day. So we make sure that information is out there. But then we also have written paper copies at schools, because some people do like the paper copies, and we do have those available. So that enables us to work with internal and external stakeholders. If you want to talk about the business community or local government, that could be through an email, that could be at a chamber event or a chamber breakfast, that could be at a legislative meeting where we go sit down with them and talk about particular issues. So I just think it depends on the particular audience, but we use all those mechanisms, and those are the ways I do it. My preferred way, sit down, fist bump, handshake, talk to you. But I also know I can't always get 1,500 people in front of me and do that, so I use the other mechanisms.
Thank you. Ms. Giglio?
Hi.
Oh, I wanted to remind the board members that we can ask follow-up questions on these questions, so if you need more information or clarification, feel free to holler out nicely.
Do we want to do that now for the first question or at the end?
No, did anybody have any follow-up questions on that? No? From now on, we can just holler them out when we're done. So Ms.
Okay.
Giglio, take.
Okay. What strategies do you routinely use when making a decision that will have significant impact on many members of a school district?
I use a collaborative process. So I think depending on what it is, and I'll use the example of when we did COVID reentry. We know that's something that all of us are facing. We all know that it's, they're calling it a pandemic now, or endemic. I don't know if it's ended yet, but I don't have the choice in the wording. But one of the things we did when we were looking at reentry, and just use the example of when we sent everyone home in March of 2020, people were freaked out because this was something that we had never seen before. Unless you were 120 years old, you hadn't lived through, the 1920s, through the Spanish flu and so forth. So one of the things we did is we put a group together, and we had parents, we had teachers, we had building administrators, we had directors, we had members of the executive cabinet, and we worked on that plan as a unit. Now, in the executive cabinet is what we call it there. I would call it executive leadership team. We talked about what our goal was on how to get staff back in a safe manner. So we talked to the group about it. We got input. We broke into 4 different groups. We had operations, human resources, instruction, and I can't remember the 4th offhand, but it'll hit me probably after the interview. But we broke into those, and we had a team leader. And then those team leaders would make sure that the team got their portion of the work done so that we could put something together that everyone could deal with. What we did in between meetings, because we met weekly, and now this case, this was a huge decision, as you can imagine. So we met weekly. Our team leaders would meet with the teams during the week. I made myself available for their meetings if needed. And then they would come back to the group and we would present the ideas. We would share the information. We would get perspectives from different people. And we mixed some people up. So on the operations team, we did have some instructional people there because there was some things we said, hey, there's some things you got to think about at the schools. You're thinking about it entirely from an operations perspective, but here's an instructional perspective, and vice versa. Then HR would say, hey, wait a second, what about this perspective? There's some legalities here. We got to talk about this. So we were able to work through all those things and come to a consensus. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that everyone there was happy with every decision we made, but we got to a point where most people could live with it and most people supported it. And one thing that I'm very proud to say we didn't have was me getting people coming back to me saying, hey, members of the committee don't want to do this. I don't know why this was decided. Or there was never a, you decided to do this. They knew we worked as a group to do so. So in most cases, I love to make collaborative decisions and use the brains at the table, use the brains of the people that are going to be most affected and impacted by this. But that also doesn't mean that if I'm in a pinch that I can't make a command decision. But my preference is to work with others because, that's going to create that ownership, and we're going to be able to move some things forward.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. How was it determined, who would be on the teams and who would be team leaders?
So I worked with our chief of human resources, And we kind of talked about who are some of the experts in these particular fields. We initially had some discussions in the executive cabinet, and we talked about what are the specific areas that we want to look at. Ironically, we came up with 3, and then after meeting with the group, it turned to 4. So we found an area that we had forgotten, which was great. So at that point, then we said, okay, who's the best point person? So when we talked about operations, we said we should probably look at our executive director of operations, because she would be the expert in that field. Human resources, of course, since the chief of human resources was helping me facilitate, we used one of our directors. Now, that didn't mean our chief of human resources still wasn't there to assist, or didn't mean that I wasn't either, but we kind of looked at the field. Instruction, at that point, we didn't have a deputy superintendent, so then we looked at one of our instructional people. We said, okay, who's our assistant superintendent over curriculum and instruction? So we can do that. So we kind of went that route, and then we kind of said, okay, who needs to be on these teams? Here's some lists of people that we think should be on it. So we had a good list there, and then they said, here's some other people we think you need to add. So we got them added. And then that way we were able to do that collaboratively as well. So it built ownership, and we would meet, we would talk about what was going on, we'd talk about what was going well and what were the struggles.
Thank you. Ms. Ziem?
Can you share with the board any experiences you might have had negotiating with unions and what you learned through those experiences?
Yeah, when I was assistant superintendent, I was on the meet and confer team. So basically, we would meet every year with our, in some states it's called an association. I know in the Midwest and out east it's a union. So we would meet with the association, and we would look at the terms of the contract, and we'd look at salary, we would look at benefits, we would look at probably a lot of the things that are currently being looked at right now. So my experience was our HR director and our CFO they were the team leaders. I was the cabinet representative, which I was like, there's already cabinet people on there, but okay, I'm happy to assist. So I was there. And one of the things I always brought it back to was in talking with our side before the meeting, and it kind of was sides initially, but it was bringing those sides together to be one unit, as opposed to it's us, it's you. It was, no, we're a district working together. So one of the things we worked on, and when we would talk was, okay, financially, what can we afford? What realistically can we do? And then that way, I went in with that knowledge so that when we would get the association member talking or the representative, I could say, look, we've done some number crunching. If this is what we're seeking, this is what has to happen on this end. Now, we can look at other numbers, but please note it will impact other areas. We're not saying the where right now. Here's some examples of where it could be, but we would need to discuss that further, and there'd need to be further discussion around that. So I was kind of a reasoned person at that point, and just kind of giving some rationales behind the why, and then, asking questions. Asking questions when someone would say, hey, we need these positions. Okay, please explain to me the necessity of the positions. Please talk about, in the grand scheme of things, how are these supporting our vision of moving student learning? So I would ask the questions, and I'd push a little bit here and there, not in a negative way, but it was a lot of time to get clarity, because if you're not clear on both sides, you can't have a negotiation. Because, it's kind of like, two people, me and someone else who are not from Nashua, and you're asking us directions on how to get somewhere, and we don't have our phones or a map with us. It's kind of difficult, right? We could probably figure it out, but it might be a little difficult. So it hastens things up, it speeds them up, and then it's able to get us to a point. So I did a lot of that pushing and a lot of that discussion, and ask questions. Okay, if we're going to do this amount of raise, why is this a necessity? Okay, we can do that, but on the other end, what would have to disappear for this to happen? So
I'd like to follow up on that. Were you ever in a situation where you were in the negotiations and that you were giving more salary increases, and at the end you had to lay off staff?
we were fortunate in that particular district, I'll be very honest with you. So no, I haven't been in that situation. We were very fortunate in that situation where we came into a budget that wasn't very strong. We were able to cut a lot of, I'll just call them expenses. They were things that, like, we were paying for programs that weren't even being used. We were paying for things like that, and we ended up being able to shave a few $1 million off the top, and that's what enabled us to give a very good raise to our staff at that time, and we were able to do that across the the positions, teachers, administrators, classified staff, so we're able to do that. But we didn't have to cut any staff, fortunately, at that point. So that's where we had other situations in other districts that I've seen. It was give and take. It was, we can give raises, but here's certain things we're going to have to take money from as far as programs. So you do everything you can to make sure it's not people, so that you have the people in front of the kids that can get them to the place we need them to be. And you try to not take too many resources, because people need supports in order, whether it's curriculum, whether it's coaching, whether it's feedback, they need that as well.
One more follow-up with this. So if you saw a budget that the salaries kind of outweighed what you need for the classroom, let's say the budget is 80%, salaries 20%, that's usually what it is. It's usually like an 80-20 plan. Would you go in and scrutinize, like you were just saying, go and look for programs that's not being used, or not going to serve the district, the children well, and kind of revamp that to make sure it balances out so we have enough resources in the classroom?
So I look at everything from a data perspective, and we use the ROI, return on investment. So we would look at what resources we were utilizing. We would look at what impact they've had in our classrooms. And at that point, we would make the decision of, is this a resource we want to continue to use, because is it showing effectiveness in assisting, number one, if it's something online that our students are using, are they showing growth from it? Number two, if it's a resource teachers are using to improve practice, is it helping them improve practice? If we don't have the data to show that, then I would argue we don't have the data to continue to pay for that, because we do need to see the return on investment, which is our kids moving forward.
Thank you.
Can I just
Yes, Ms. Ziem.
piggyback on Ms. Johnson's question? Was the 80-20 that she mentioned, has that been your experience, that the schools that you came from carried that kind of a proportion?
Yeah, that's pretty normal. What I've seen is anywhere from 75 to 85% is generally
75 to 85.
So 80 is a pretty good number. I've seen it as low as 75 in some systems, but those were large systems that also had a lot more tax base, so they were able to do that and be more competitive with salaries. Some of the districts that were smaller, a lot of times you did start getting closer to that 80 to 85 realm.
Thank you. Our next set of questions is, question is from Ms. Starling.
Tell us about a time that you failed, and what did you do to rectify the situation?
Oh, I remember talking about this. So I just become a principal in Houston, Texas, and I was going into a great campus. There's about 1,500 kids, and there's some great things going on there. So I'm excited. I'm like, I don't have to come in. I don't have to do turnaround work. This is just make great greater. So, but I said, I looked at our data, and I got with our leadership team, and I also got with our teacher leaders and said, okay, where are we strong? Where are some areas we need to grow? So in looking at that, we weren't moving as many kids in the growth area. We were hitting the number of kids that would be considered quote unquote proficient, but we weren't hitting those growth metrics. So I said, well, let's kind of think about some things we can do. So I talked to my dean of instruction, who I'd hired. She had also come from out of state, so you got two out-of-staters, and they're looking at us like, what are you talking about? And I said, hey, I got a PSYOP lesson plan template that I know will move us to the next level. I've seen it, we've used it other places, it's been effective. We need to do this. She saw it, she looked at it, she says, no, I think this is what we need to do. So we set up our 10 days of PD, and it was different. We had 10 days with the staff before actually kids got there, which is different than most places. Usually it's closer to 5. So we get in there, and we have a great presentation. We are fired up. It was clear as mud. They looked at us like they didn't know what we were talking about. And I'm sitting there, what just happened? This was a great presentation. So then I'm thinking about it, and her last name's Capers. I said, Miss Capers, we need to go meet. So we go meet after, we grab some lunch, Texas Whataburger. So we ran down to Whataburger, grabbed a burger, came back. So let's talk about this. So we're talking about it. And we're both kind of like, what the heck just happened? This was clear. We get a knock on the door. And a teacher who ended up becoming my magnet coordinator eventually, and was a teacher leader and does some other work, she knocks on my door. And she says, hey, I got exactly what you said. Most people didn't. And I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking, I kind of saw that, I know. So then she says, let's talk real quick. So can you put the presentation up? So I said, yeah. So we just project it. We had a projector in there. And she says, let me help you with something. We put 3 words into the presentation. We put them into different areas that we were explaining in the template. She goes, this is language they're used to using. She goes, I understand what you're saying because I've been to national conferences and I'm used to that verbiage. That's not the norm in this particular campus. We put the 3 words in, and I'm thinking, okay, we're going to do this tomorrow. We're getting right back in front of them, 9 a.m. We get up there and we say, look, we know yesterday was clear as mud. We plan to leave here today with it being clear as glass. So we did less than the hour that we had planned. They got it. We used the language. We took the feedback. They took it. By the end of we didn't even finish the time. We were able to send it off to go do lesson planning, and they got together, got their books with the standards, with our curriculum guides. They did all that, and they got to work. The results of that was we were in the top 25% of the state for growth that year. So we were very excited about it, and you know, it was the 7-star middle school that I mentioned up there. We actually beat them, which the school never had, and when I supervised them, they didn't let me forget it. So, but it was a great thing, and it was great for our kids because we had some kids that needed to catch up, and it helped them start getting caught up to where they needed to be.
Any follow-up, Ms. Raymond?
Thanks. I would like to follow up. This makes me curious because you mentioned earlier the difference in terminology for unions and associations. And I know that you've worked in, I think, Colorado and Texas, and now you're in Kansas City. What would your approach be now to some of those regionalisms and the way that even the language of education changes from place to place?
Well, I laughed today because as you know, Ms. Brown was taking me to schools, as I talked to different principals, you know, we talked about how at one point it was ESL, at one point it's ELL. Where I'm at, it's language learners. So I think the first thing is learning. I think the first thing is coming in and listening. It would be talking to the executive leadership team and finding out what we're doing. What I don't know, ask. Also, what I've learned from experience is if you don't understand, the acronym I'm using, please ask. Because you're going to be doing that, and I'm not going to know what you're saying either. So I'm going to be like, hold up, I'm lost for a second. What is that? Okay, thank you. So I think that would be the biggest thing. I think it's building that clarity. And they would also be looking at what's the most common language used here. So myself becoming more familiar with it. I think the reality is if I were to come into this position, I would be the one moving somewhere, not people moving there. So I have to make those adaptations. And I also think that's part of leadership is you find out what's going to get the team going, and you find out what language and how that's going to get the direction that it needs to go. So yeah, having done it successfully and not so successfully, I've learned the first thing is, and not that this interview will signify this, but you know, one thing is listen 3 times as much as you talk, because that's how you learn, and then you can ask questions from there.
Thank you. And to be clear, that was one of our questions from our students. They came up with that. The next one up is Ms. Brown.
Okay. So this is also on behalf of our students. Where do you stand on the issue of class rank or GPA?
So I had a great dialogue today with our student board member in regards to this. And
I'm guessing you can guess where this question came from.
and I mean great in a really positive way. It was a fun conversation, you know. So I think one of the things he and I talked about is some of the potential, and I did watch, actually that was one of the meetings I watched, and I was studying and watching board meetings, but I was very much in agreement that sometimes you do have grade inflation. And I think one of the things you have problems with is, we'll use an AP as an example, it's a 5.2 on your grade scale. And he was shocked I knew that, and I was like, I was a building administrator, I haven't forgotten that yet, so we laughed about it. But you can have an easy AP class. And I'm not saying that's the case here, so please, nobody take it that way, but I've seen instances where the AP class was easier than the general ed class. And you're getting students that are getting a 5.2. So now you're creating some inequities as far as achievement, because some people are working harder for grades than others, number one. Number two, GPAs aren't always reflective of learning. So as far as class rank, it's not something that I'm married to or something that I would say, oh, back in my day, class rank meant everything to me. You're talking about a guy who had a 3-point-something GPA in high school because he did enough, because it was like, I just need to do enough to get a 3-point-something. I need to get a scholarship. So, but I do know it means a lot to people. But I think truly working with our staffs and making sure that those GPAs reflect who they are is most important. And the class rank saying I'm number 1 or I'm number 12, we know when colleges look at these, when they're looking at applications, they're looking at the courses you've taken, they're looking at your grades in the courses. I would guess out here they're looking at your SAT score. In Kansas, it's ACT. They're looking at those types of things, what a type of activities, sports, what have you, you're involved in. They're looking at all that stuff. So that wouldn't be something that I would die on the hill for. I don't think it's the most important thing in the world. What I think is the most important thing is that GPAs truly reflect the learning that's going on with the student and the campus.
Do we have any follow-up questions? No? Okay, next up is Ms. Raymond.
Thank you. This question is also from our students. It says, what are your plans to foster connection between the superintendent and both students and families?
So the student part, I actually had this discussion today as well, which is good, because at least I guess I was prepped a little bit, right? He didn't even know it. So when the student that toured me talked about it, he asked me about how would we engage students. So I kind of find it kind of funny. But I talked about one of the things we do in my current district is with 5 high schools. We have 5 representatives from each school that are part of the superintendent's cabinet. It's a little different here with the 2, so I'd probably look at something like 7 and 7. And I would want a variety of students, though. I wouldn't want it to be all student council students. I'd want it to be a variety of students from across different cross sections. And that way we're getting a diverse outlook on things. We can have some real talk. You know, I heard there's early releases, so we could get them bussed over here, or you know, I don't know what district policy is. Maybe they can drive. I don't know. Different districts are different, so I don't want to say one thing and be contradictory. But you get them and have some real dialogue. We buy them some lunch. They come over. We talk about what's going well in the campuses, what they like, what are some struggles, and then also talk about what do they want from their education. You know, they're the ones getting the diplomas. I always would tell staff this or other employees, I have pieces of paper. I've been through schools. I can go get another piece of paper. This is our students' chance right here. We have to put them in the position to be successful. So we have to get a cross-section of what's going on. So I would do something like that. Definitely, we'd set up a superintendent's council and we'd get that, you know, that diverse thought from groups of students. Families, I'd do what I've done in the past. You know, we'd set up meetings that we could do the 2 high schools. Those are always good central points. If we don't get the kind of traction we want there with attendance, we could do them at community centers. We could do them different places within the community. I facilitate meetings in Spanish. I've done it many times in my current and previous districts. It's the norm. So I think you come to them, and I know we have access to Portuguese interpreters. The extent of my Portuguese is obrigado, that's as far as it goes, so I'd need to get help there. And then if we have other languages, our top 5 or top 7, we'd look at those. I would work with our, you know, Student Services Department, ELL, see who we have interpreters, and who we don't have interpreters, we would get them and contract them in. But we'd meet the families where they are. We need to build that comfort level to where they'll then come to the schools and come to us. Because until they feel like it's their process, or until they understand that we're there with them, and I'm not saying that all of them don't understand that, but the bridges have to be built. It's our job to build them. Once they're built, they'll start crossing. So definitely set up those community meetings, definitely set up those things, use the media. I'll call up a radio station in Spanish. I'll talk in Spanish if I need to. That's not a problem. I'll get on one of the local English stations. I'll do that. But we will look for different ways to engage them and let them know what events are coming up. Last thing is, when you can, have food. I mean, you have food, what do they say? You build it, people, they will come. Well, you have food, people will come. So we work with our local partners in the community. We set up events, and we get our parents and our community members to come out. I think that's where partnerships with the Chamber of Commerce, I think that's where partnerships with different groups like that come in, because it's also support for them. These are their workforces. These are the people they work with and that work for them. So I think that's a good way to engage a higher number of people. And then once you have them there, truly listen. Take their input, and be honest if it's something that's not going to happen. Don't sit and blow air into the balloon and make them think the idea is going to happen. Say, this is the why we can't do this. Here are some of the legalities on the whys, and you're real about it. But then say, look, I like the idea. We're going to bring it back and discuss it, and then come back to them.
I have a follow-up question for that.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you would want to have a group of students who weren't just from the student council. What other types of students would you ask to be involved in something like that?
You would definitely want your ESL students, because that's one of your biggest student populations, so you would definitely want representation. And then I would work with the building principals to see what other groups. So we'd definitely probably want some type of special education representative, because that's a high percentage of our student population as well. So you definitely want a diverse group. You definitely want a diverse group both in learning, but you also want a diverse group, gender, ethnicity. You want something that reflects our district, because if all the kids are of the same ethnic background, then it's probably not that representative. So I would definitely want different types of diversity. It would work with building leaders, because you know what, they're the ones who know the students. They're in the buildings every day, and they can work with their teams to say, and it also builds leadership. Some of these quiet kids that don't come forward, this is a chance for them to engage. And a lot of times they got great ideas.
I just have a quick question again on the student cabinets. How often would you meet when you did this in the past? Was it like once a month, or, you know, how often during the school year would you get together?
I would say monthly to start. And then I think once there's an establishment, I think you could probably go to 4 times a year, because that's every 2 months, and that's pretty fair. But I think you got to start monthly, because there's also got to be some trust built with them. Because you're somebody, whoever you decide will be the next superintendent is probably going to be someone they don't know.
Right.
So they're going to say, well, who is this person? Who are they talking to me? Why are they talking to me? So you build that trust with them, and then you actually show them that their voice does matter.
And would the successes or plans that were implemented based on this be shared with the whole student body?
Yeah, and one of the things I talked to the student representative today about is I said, I don't think it's fair that you and the other student rep carry the weight of 3,400 other high schoolers.
That's a lot.
I said, I'm glad you're here to represent. You're going to be a leader, but we would also need other people engaged so that we could truly push things. Because the reality is we gotta listen to what they want. You know, one of the things is sometimes we as adults say we need to offer certain courses. Just use that as a prime example. We don't have 25 kids in the building that want the course. I mean, so how are you going to offer it? How do you justify it?
Yeah.
So you do things like that. That would be, and that's just one topic, right, that you could talk to them about and say, are there some courses you think we should be offering that we're not? But then be realistic in, is it doable at this time? If we are to do it, what would the timeline look like, and how would you do that? So I think that's where you build credibility with the students, and it also builds stronger relationships.
Thank you. I like that idea a lot.
Thanks.
Ms. Raymond?
Thanks. I just have another follow-up on that. What are your views on the superintendent's participation in other community events, like things that aren't certainly like school sporting events and concerts, et cetera, but also other community events that might be going on outside of the school sponsored events?
So just to go over something, pre-COVID, I would go to 5 parades in the community in Kansas City, Kansas. And some of those parades were much more fun to be at than others, because it might be 95 or 97 degrees and you're standing out on sidewalk and you're like, my God, what's going on? I'm used to doing those other things. I'm used to being part of our local Chamber of Commerce's legislative committee. I do a lot of those already, so I'm used to that. I do think that you do have to be a voice. I write testimony for the state legislator if we have something that's going to impact our district. If there's some bill coming down the pike, I've done that. In fact, I just wrote 2 last week. So I think as a superintendent, you have to be engaged in many facets of the community, and you have to be a pillar. So you have to be someone that's visible and doing as much as you can. But I also think you got to utilize your team. You know, you can't be everywhere, because if you're everywhere, you're not going to last however many years a contract is, because you will burn out. But you utilize your team members and build those relationships to where it might be the superintendent this time at the meeting, or it might be the associate soup this time, or it might be our director of HR. You know, but you utilize that team approach once those relationships are developed and we have district visibility. Because what people got to understand as well is the superintendent don't have all the answers. There would be times I would need to go to our director of HR because I would not have the answer. She'll have the answer. And then we can sit down and talk about it and say, hey, this is a problem that's come across my desk. What can we do about it? What's the best way to resolve this? And I'll talk to the expert. but also the community would learn that as well, is, good, bring it to me, we'll get it solved. But it may not be the call back for me, it might be someone else, but we'll get you your resolution. But I think visibility is key. I think the superintendent needs to be engaged, needs to be involved. I think I should, if I were to get this job, I should be members of different groups here in the community, and would hope to expect to get invites to those and be engaged in some of the things going on.
Any follow-up? No? Next up is Ms. Lamphere.
So what are your long-term career objectives?
That's a hard question. If you'd asked that before COVID, I probably would have had a real quick answer that would have had a retirement age and everything. I look at it like this. How I looked at things pre-COVID have probably changed a lot, and what I'm doing. Honestly, I do think my next step in my career is the superintendency. I evidently am interviewing here because that would be somewhere I'd have very much interest in being that. But I'd like to settle it down, be somewhere for a minute, make the difference, and then at some point, I'd like to retire when I'm 58 or 60. So I got a good ways to go still, so that wouldn't be in a year or two. But, that, and then something like that, continue to establish roots in a community and do those types of things. So career-wise, I look at it this way. I was a poor kid from the north side of Denver. I'm way ahead on the scale of life. I've done more than I ever thought I would do, and I've done more than maybe some people ever thought I would do, and that's okay. So I'm on, what do they say in Vegas? I'm on the house's money now. So I want to, look at the position that comes, do the best I can there, work with this particular board, work with the community, work with the team, and get that placed into a great spot. And then after a few years, we can all reevaluate if I'm still wanted and go from there. But as far as long-term, I don't want to be the mayor. I don't want to be the president of the local university. No knock on those jobs, but just, those aren't my ambitions. I'm a lifelong educator. So I want to continue to stay in education, and then when I retire, hopefully move somewhere warm. And then if it's foreign, then I won't be working still, because then people will be calling me and I'll keep working. I actually will stop myself from working. So maybe around 60, that'd be my long-term ambition as far as career.
Thank you.
Follow up? I get to have the last question, not because I helped make the list or anything, but I just want to check in with Mr. Cloud. Did you have any questions in regards to anything that I keep forgetting to check in with you. I apologize.
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up in regards to the second question?
The strategies you routinely use when making a decision? Yep.
Could you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, so I just had a question. The reopening plan that you put together and you organized all these different groups, I was wondering, what role did you play in the last few months of the 2019-2020 school year? Did you guys go virtual, remote, that kind of thing?
So we stayed remote through, and let me just get my timeline here because the dates all start running together. We went out in March of 20. We stayed remote through the end of that school year. In the fall, we started bringing back some of our highest need students, so some of our special ed, most specialized programs, they came back in person, and our newcomers. So we brought them back in the later fall, I want to say October-ish, November-ish, and that would be of 20. Then in March, so about a year later, we did come back in person. Our Board of Education passed the resolution to bring our students back in person. And at this point of the roughly 22,500 students, only 500 selected a online option, so 22,000 are attending school in person.
Fabulous. Any follow-up?
I just was trying to get clarification on the reopening plan that you spoke about. Was that for this current school year?
It was for the previous, and what we did is actually was initially to get employees, and then the second piece of that plan was actually what our online learning plan would look like. So we had to look at resources such as Seesaw, Google Classroom, and start utilizing those. We had to reinsure that we were one-to-one outfitted, so we worked with our facilities team, our technology team, operations with that. We looked at our mitigation practices with operations, so we use that as we move back in. We also designed we call them hotspot plans, so that if we had a particular building that maybe we had an outbreak there, or there was the risk of an outbreak, that we could shut down but could continue education. We did all of those, and then what we've done is over time, it moved into more the academic phase. So our assistant soup of academics was working on it, and then it moved back to me towards the end of last year, and we got some things rolling for this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So my question is, what do you believe are the key components to a healthy work environment?
Trust. I think you have to build that culture of trust. There was a saying that I heard one time, is it takes a long time to build it, it doesn't take long to destroy it. So I think you have to work to maintain a strong working environment where there's trust between the individuals working together, as well as them trusting of those who, make supervisory decisions. I think, I'm trying to think of how exactly I want to term this, because I don't think I have it in one word, but it would be everyone's working in the same direction. Mm-hmm. So everyone's work is pushing towards the same thing. In our sense, it's student learning. So everything we're doing is going to push our students to learn at an optimum level, mm-hmm. and take them to meet their potential. And I think you have to be collaborative. I think the days of, we heard this, the old, I was a history teacher, so, the old days of you hear about the general who was on the field and he made the decisions. Those are somewhat gone. We become a lot more collaborative as a society, and that doesn't mean command decisions don't have to be made. But in the same token, you have to have a trustful, collaborative environment where people are going to work together to get you there. And I think if you don't have those, you're not going anywhere. Well, you are going somewhere, but it's probably moving down, and it's probably not where you want to move, right? Mm-hmm. So I think those are the things, and that takes time, and that takes work, and I think that's part of, being real with each other, building that dialogue, sharing of ideas, looking at best practices, looking at research, looking at data, and when you use those successes, that continues to build the trust. So I think that collaborative environment that's trusting is your optimum work environment, and that's the kind of schools we need. It's the kind of central office we need. Those are the kind of parent meetings we need. Mm-hmm. I think it just reflects across the organization for the internal and external stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Follow-up? Ms. Seam.
Well, mine goes a little bit away back to, like Mr. Caffey, goes back to something you said earlier. But for, obviously, Texas, Kansas, a little different than New Hampshire. And so can you just clarify for me the difference in your mind in a superintendent and in a chief of staff? I don't think we have a chief of staff in the state of New Hampshire. So it might help us to have a better idea of.
Yeah, I have a set group of departments that I currently work with, and I've worked with probably 8 different departments from across the organization. I now, but in my role, I work with communications, I work with HR, I work with finance, I work with operations, I work with the schools, I work with federal and state compliance, I work with student services, I work with ESL migrant. So I could probably go across the organization. I work with every one of those departments. Initially my role there was a lot of media and working with the lobbyist. It's transformed to where it's a lot more influence and working with those other departments. I was laughing talking about this today with somebody where, there's times I'll go to a school and they'll say, hey, we have lights out. They haven't been fixed. Or we had a security camera out at a building. It hasn't been fixed in 3 months. I put the work order in. So I called the executive director of operations, said, hey, can I get your help on this? Can you see about a work order, see where we're at with that? And sometimes it's, hey, we apologize. We'll get somebody out this afternoon, and they do. And other times it's, we don't have a work order for that, Mr. Lincus. And I say, can you assign a tech, and there'll be a work order in the next 10 minutes? And they're like, we're happy to help you. And it's from those built relationships. I've gotten to know the different team members, and there's that trust there, right? When they've needed the backup, I've backed them up, and vice versa. So, so then I'll go to the principal and say, like, hey, get the work order in. Come on, I'm trying to help you out here, you know. But it's like that. So I work with now the superintendent, in some ways, it's the buck stops with you. So you have to make those hard decisions in the end, and you're the one signing off on them. So all those collaborative pieces need to be there. But in the end, what do they say? It's your name in the newspaper behind the scores.
Mm-hmm. But you're right, sometimes in those small things, you build the trust that achieves the big thing.
Exactly.
So, thank you.
Any follow-up? No. Ms. Raymond?
Thanks. I have a follow-up regarding the healthy work environment and trust. One of the things that is happening in New Hampshire right now is we have a recent law that was passed and is now in effect. And essentially, it's a divisive concepts bill. And people can complain about things that teachers are teaching because they feel if it makes their child uncomfortable or if they feel it is in some way divisive. And then the teacher's credentials become endangered. So there's a lot of trust and fear happening, especially in our social studies teachers, around the teaching of that. And so I guess my question is, what could you do in the role of superintendent to help foster like a feeling of trust and, you know, making sure that our teachers feel supported while also making sure that they're delivering a quality education?
So, question going on everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things is, let me think of how I want to word this. So I was a history teacher. I taught government. I taught American history, world history, geography, sociology. I could keep going down the list. And there was always healthy debate, and there was always being real about how things are and how things were. And I think we have to be very truthful, and our teachers need to continue to be truthful in what is. And I think we're teaching standards, and as long as the work we're doing is defined by the standards and we're teaching those standards, then we have our teachers' best interests and our students' best interests at heart. And what I would say is it's our job to teach critical thinking. Critical thinking sometimes is not always everyone thinking the same thing. It's giving different perspectives and different points of view. And there's going to be times that there's some, excuse the terminology, needed discomfort. Because you have to learn by looking back at things. And there are things in the history of our country that we could look back and be very proud of. There are some other things that maybe not so much. But we have to be realistic in our dialogue about them, because if we don't learn these things, and if we're not real about them, you know, the old history teacher, right? If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So we have to put our teachers in a position to where they're able to teach what needs to be taught, and that we're able to build critical thinkers of our students. Because in the end, it's not our job to tell students what to think, it's to assist them in learning how to think. So, and I use the example today, when I was a teacher way back, you know, I had kids write essays, we had rubrics, we had things they had to follow. I could disagree 110% with what the student wrote, but guess what? If they followed the rubric, they followed the prompt, if they had the supporting evidence, they got the A. Maybe they got the B if they were missing something, but you know, they got what they needed. And vice versa, the kid could write exactly what I wanted to hear and have the exact same opinion I did, but if they didn't follow the prompt, if they didn't have the evidence, if they didn't support it, they didn't get an A. I don't want to say they got an F, but you know, they didn't get an A, I can tell you that. Or they might have got a sir, ma'am, you need to rewrite this. Let's meet and discuss. But I think we need to put our teachers in a position to where we're teaching our students to critically think, to question when necessary, but to also make their own decisions. And that's probably the best way I can put it, but I do think we need to back our teachers, because they do need to push the thinking protocol, and they need to push our kids to think. And one fine line of thinking does not teach anyone how to think.
Thank you. I'm seeing eyes. No? Okay. All right. Well, that actually concludes all of our questions. I know we asked last time, but do you have any questions for us?
You know, I asked some questions then, and I got some answers to that. I think, and no, I don't know it all, so I want to clear that up. But I think visiting the schools today was great, and visiting central office, because some of the things I probably would have asked, I got some clarity on. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. It was a lot of fun to be in buildings. I always, COVID made us forget that at some points, and it gets you back to the who and why we do things. So just thank you for that opportunity, and any dialogue in the future I would look forward to, so thank you for this time.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We thoroughly enjoyed meeting you and having you answer our questions and letting us do some follow-up. So I think we don't have any other business, correct?
No?
No? So getting ready, Paula? Looking for a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I just want to say thank you, and it was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for taking the time to come here to Nashua. Thank you.
Thank you for all of us. It was really,
It's a wonderful education to hear, just to hear how you do things differently and we don't always get that opportunity, at least I haven't. And so it was a real pleasure hearing some of the unique, unusual, at least different from the way we do things. Thank you for that. That was wonderful.
it's so much better to see you in person.
I would agree.
So much better.
Okay. Paula, take it away.
I'm going to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
These two are the dynamic duo.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, the motion is to adjourn. Ms. Darling?
Yes.
Mr. Claffey?
Yes.
Ms. Gilio?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Lampier?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Deem?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Okay, we are adjourned at 7:08.